Welcome, weary traveler. You've found your way back to boring history for sleep, where the past is gently unrolled like a papyrus scroll, meant to lull rather than startle. Before we begin, dim your lights, let your blanket wrap around you like a linen shroud, and maybe let a fan hum in the background as steady as the Nile. As always, you're invited to like and subscribe, but only if this really soothes you. Leave a comment telling us where you're tuning in from and what time it is on your side of the sun. We're always curious. Now, close your eyes a little and imagine this. You wake up in ancient Egypt. The air is dry, the Nile shimmers nearby, and your first task of the day is not building pyramids or praying to Ra, but figuring out how to stay clean in a place where sand, sweat, and sun rule everything. The first thing you notice is the brightness. The Egyptian sun doesn't sneak into your room with soft morning light. It marches in like an overeager guest, already high above the horizon and reflecting off every patch of sand it can find. Even before you open your eyes fully, you can feel it warming the thin linen draped across your body, urging you to leave sleep behind. You rise from your reed mat. There's no mattress here, no thick quilt to roll yourself into, only a woven mat that has left an imprint on your skin. The air is dry, as always. It's a dryness that makes your throat feel parched. Before you've even spoken a word, a faint breeze slips in through the doorway, carrying with it a fine dust. You inhale, and there it is. The smell of earth baked in the sun. Faintly metallic from the river nearby, touched with the faint musk of animals. Not unpleasant, just constant. The soundtrack is equally steady, the chatter of geese down by the water, the clatter of pots somewhere in the village, and always the far-off call of someone already awake and at work. Egypt doesn't exactly let you sleep in. You stretch, running your hands along your arms, and you immediately feel the residue of the night. Dust sticks to everything here, and your skin is no exception. Sleeping on the floor, even with mats, means you wake up with a fine film of grit along your arms, your face, and even your scalp. If you've ever slept at the beach and woken up coated in sand, imagine that but every day. Cleanliness isn't just about appearances in this climate. It's about comfort and sanity. So your first task, before food, before work, is simple. Wash. You step out into the open air, and there is the Nile, as steady and eternal as any god. Its surface gleams with sunlight, rippling where fish break the water, or reeds stir along the edge. People often talk about the pyramids as Egypt's great wonder, but in truth, it's this river. It isn't just the source of food and travel, it's also the great wash basin. You kneel by its bank, cupping the water in your hands. The shock is immediate. It's cool against your warm skin, startling in its freshness. You splash your face, and already the grit begins to dissolve, sliding away into the current. It's a small ritual, but one that makes you feel alive again after the heavy night air. You rinse your arms, your neck, perhaps even your feet if the bank isn't too muddy. You aren't alone here. Other villagers crouch along the edge too, each performing their own version of the same task. Children giggling as they splash each other. A woman wringing out a cloth, an older man carefully rinsing his scalp. There's a rhythm to it, a quiet choreography that happens each morning and has happened for centuries. Of course, this is not tap water. You're very aware that what flows here also carries silt, plants, and the occasional reminder that crocodiles exist. It's not pristine, but it is life. Egyptians understood that water had to be handled with care, sometimes storing it in clay jars, sometimes letting the silt settle before drinking. But for rinsing away the dust of the night, it's perfect. You pat your face dry with a bit of linen, feeling the skin tighten in the dry air almost immediately. The cleanliness is fleeting, but for now, you feel lighter. And as you sit there on the bank, you notice something else. Washing isn't just a matter of comfort, it's a moment of pause. The sun might be pressing down, the workday might be looming, but for these few minutes, you're simply present. You splash, you breathe, you watch the water flow endlessly northward. It's meditative in its own way. Perhaps that's part of why Egyptians tied cleanliness so closely to purity and the divine. Even a simple rinse can feel like a small renewal. Still, the Nile only gets you so far. Splashing water across your skin won't keep you clean forever. The sand will be back, clinging stubbornly to every crease and fold. Sweat will join it soon enough. And so, as you rise from the bank and step back toward your home, you start to think, what else did Egyptians use? Surely they didn't rely only on a morning splash. Surely there were other trick scrubs, pastes, something to really deal with the grit. And indeed there were. They had their own form of soap, though not like the frothy bars we know today. Something far more mineral, far more suited to this desert land. As you dry your hands, you can almost imagine the sharp tang of it, already rough, salty, yet strangely effective, will carry you from the refreshing embrace of the Nile straight into the world of homemade cleansers. Your skin may be rinsed with the Nile's cool water, but you know from experience that water alone isn't enough. The dust clings stubbornly, and the faint sheen of oil your body naturally produces holds on to it like glue. You want more than just a rinse. You want something to actually scrub away the grime. And here in ancient Egypt, you do have something that works, though it wouldn't look much like the soap you're used to today. What you reach for is a small jar containing a pale, powdery substance, natron. It's not fancy. It's a naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, gathered from dry lake beds. The same natron that priests use to dry out bodies for mummification also has a perfectly ordinary, everyday use: washing. You sprinkle some into your palm, add a splash of water from a clay jug, and the mixture turns into a gritty paste. No bubbles, no sweet fragrance, just a briny sludge that stings faintly if you've got a cut on your hand. You rub it across your arms, feeling the coarseness scrape against your skin. It's not exactly comfortable, but in this world, effectiveness outweighs comfort. The natron strips away oils, absorbs odors, and leaves your skin feeling oddly tight. You can almost imagine it squeaking under your fingertips as it dries. Think of it less as a luxurious body wash and more as nature's dish soap. Rough, salty, but dependable. If you were lucky enough to have more wealth, your jar might hold a mixture enhanced with oils and herbs. A little myrrh here, some juniper oil. They're ingredients that don't just clean, but also leave a faint fragrance lingering behind. Imagine using dish soap and perfume at the same time. It may sound strange, but in a climate where everyone sweats all day and the air is thick with dust, smelling faintly of tree resin is a blessing. And if you think soap sort of sounds primitive, remember this: many parts of the world wouldn't have soap-like substances for centuries more. The Egyptians, with their jars of natron and their oil mixtures, were well ahead in their daily fight against sweat and smell. It wasn't luxurious, but then, very little in hygiene was meant to be luxurious. It was practical, necessary, and tied to a deeper sense of order. To be clean wasn't just to be comfortable. It was to be closer to purity, to balance, even to the gods. Still, the process could be a bit abrasive. Imagine exfoliating every day with something that feels like wet sandpaper. Your skin may be clean, but it might also feel a little raw. Perhaps this is why the Egyptians balanced their natron scrubs with oils afterward moisturizing. It's not because they had a skincare routine, but because if you didn't, you'd probably end up cracking like a sun-dried pot. As you rinse the last of the natron away, you notice how fresh you feel. Not perfumed in the modern sense, but stripped back, neutral, reset. You're ready for the day. But then, your attention drifts upward, because while your skin might be sorted out, your hair is another matter entirely. And in this world, hair carries its own set of problems and solutions. Ranging from shaving everything off to donning elaborate wigs perfumed with wax, clean skin is only the beginning.
Next.
You'll need to decide what to do with your head. Would you rather wrestle with sand, sweat, and Lysor? Trade it all for a polished scalp and a fragrant wig? The choice was easier than you might think. Your skin may be freshly scoured with natron, smooth and faintly salty, but as your fingers rise toward your scalp, you're reminded that hair in ancient Egypt was its own battlefield. The desert heat, the endless dust, and the very real presence of lice made long, natural locks more of a burden than a blessing. You don't need to imagine much. Sweat clinging to strands, dust weaving itself into tangles, and tiny, unwelcome visitors making themselves at home. Not exactly glamorous. So what's the solution? For many Egyptians, it was simple to shave it all off. Men, women, even children often kept their heads closely shaved. A smooth scalp was cool, it was clean, and most importantly, it was less attractive to lice. You could feel the razor scraping across your head every few days, a bronze blade leaving behind the faint sting of skin newly exposed to the sun. Practical, yes, but also a little vulnerable. A bare head under the Egyptian sun could feel like sitting under a magnifying glass. Enter the wig. The Egyptians perfected this clever compromise. Remove your own inconvenient hair, then replace it with something you could control. The wig could be taken off, cleaned, scented, even switched out for another depending on the occasion. Your real hair might be gone, but your public image was better than ever. For the wealthy, wigs were made of human hair-thick braids woven together with care. For those with fewer resources, plant fibers or sheep's wool would do. Can picture yourself walking into the marketplace with your wig carefully arranged. The sun is already hot, but you feel the wax cones placed on top begin to soften those little lumps of perfumed fat that Egyptians wore. During feasts and festivals, as the wax melts, it drips gently down into the wig, releasing fragrance. To modern ears, that may sound messy, but for the Egyptians, it was a stroke of genius. A portable air freshener, keeping you smelling sweet in the middle of a crowded, sweaty gathering. And these weren't just practical objects. Wigs were symbols too. A short-cropped style might signal a scribe, neat and serious. Long, elaborate braids might belong to a noblewoman, designed to cascade over her shoulders with controlled drama. Some were simple every day, where others were as formal as evening gowns. Imagine the Egyptian version of a bad hair day, as being not tangled curls, but forgetting to put on the right wig for the right occasion. Of course, not everyone shaved completely. Some Egyptians kept their natural hair short and manageable, carefully oiled to keep it glossy and easier to comb. Children were sometimes left with a single braid or lock of hair, a sign of youth. Beards, too, were shaved away, or in the case of pharaohs, replaced with ceremonial false ones, neatly tied on with straps. Appearance was always a choice, even when practicality dictated much of it. You run your hand over your freshly shaved head, or maybe over the carefully oiled braids of your wig, and you feel a sense of control. In a world filled with dust and sweat, this is one area where you decide how you are seen. Clean, smooth, and perhaps even fragrant. Scalp is tamed, the public face is ready. But then your thoughts drift inward, towards something less visible, but just as important. You've scrubbed your skin, managed your hair, and donned your wig. But what about your mouth? After all, bread here is hard, gritty, and full of tiny flecks of stone from grinding. Your teeth ache from the wear of daily life, and breath isn't always fresh under the desert sun. Egyptians, as it turns out, had their own way of dealing with that problem. Too, though, it may sound more like scrubbing a kitchen floor than freshening a smile. And so, having sorted your scalp, you turn toward the next ritual of hygiene, the art of brushing. With powders sharp enough to make your teeth squeak, your skin feels polished from natron, your scalp either shaved or snug beneath a wig. But as soon as you take your first bite of bread this morning, you're reminded of a problem the Egyptians could never quite escape: their teeth. Bread here isn't soft and fluffy, no airy baguettes or crusty loaves. Egyptian bread is dense, hearty, and laced with tiny flecks of ground stone. That wasn't intentional grinding grain on stone. Corn simply left behind a sprinkling of grit. Bite after bite, day after day, it's like chewing on a very mild form of sandpaper. The result? Teeth that wear down fast, gums that protest, and breath that isn't exactly lotus fresh. You run your tongue across your teeth and feel the roughness, the film of yesterday's bread still clinging there. Egyptians understood that rinsing alone wasn't enough. So you turn to the little clay pot kept near your bedding. Inside is a dry, crumbly mixture. The Egyptian version of toothpaste. It doesn't look inviting. Squeezable tube with a swirl of blue gel. No promises of whitening in 7 days. Instead, it's a humble powder created by grinding together natural ingredients. The recipe varies depending on what's available and how wealthy you are. Commonly, there's a base of rock salt, mint leaves, and dried iris flowers. If you're really committed, or perhaps unlucky, pumice stone might be added for extra scrubbing power. Some mixtures even included crushed ox hooves or burnt eggshells. All very effective, if slightly unsettling. It's less minty fresh and more geological sample, with a hint of herbal tea. You wet a finger, dip it into the powder, and bring it to your mouth. Sensation is immediate and intense. It's gritty, sharp, like scrubbing your teeth with chalk mixed with sand. You rub it across your teeth, pressing in circles, then drag it across the surface again and again. It doesn't foam, doesn't bubble, but it scours. The pumice grates against enamel, the salt stings a little at your gums, and the mint, faint though it is, brings a whisper of freshness. It's not pleasant, but it works, right? You spit the residue into the dirt floor and rinse with a mouthful of water, swishing until the chalky grit is gone. When you run your tongue across your teeth again, they feel smooth, almost squeaky, like plates fresh from a wash. Your gums might tingle, maybe even bleed a little, but your breath is better, and the sensation of being clean outweighs the discomfort. Imagine the pride in this small ritual. In a world without dentists, or rather, in a world where dentists were more likely to pull teeth than save them, prevention was everything. Egyptians did their best to hold on to their smiles, even though by middle age, many mouths showed the toll of years of gritty bread and harsh powders. Still, the effort matters. It's one more way to fight the environment, one more way to keep dignity intact. And there's another layer here. Just as clean skin was tied to purity, fresh breath carried its own social meaning. No one wanted to speak to their neighbor or their god while breathing out the aroma of old onions and sour beer. A mouth rinsed with mint and pumice was more than just personal comfort. It was courtesy, a sign of respect for yourself and for others. You wipe your mouth, set the little pot of powder aside, and take a deep breath. You feel refreshed, reset, you're presentable again. Yet in this heat, smelling good takes more than clean teeth. Sweat is inevitable, clinging to your skin almost as soon as you move. And in Egypt, the solution wasn't deodorant sticks or aerosol sprays, it was perfume. Oils, resins, and floral essences became the true armor against body odor. And so, with your teeth scrubbed raw but gleaming, you're ready for the next step in the daily routine. Smoothing scented oils over your skin until you carry the aroma of flowers and resin wherever you go. A fragrant shield against the desert sun. Your teeth feel freshly scoured, slightly sore perhaps, but undeniably cleaner. Yet even as you breathe a little easier, the Egyptian sun is already at work. It presses down on you like an extra layer of clothing, coaxing out sweat within minutes. You can almost feel it gathering, beating on your arms, sliding down your back. Here's the truth. There is no escaping sweat in this land. What you can do, however, is make it smell less like sweat. That's where perfumed oils come in. It's not a luxury tucked away for feast days, but a daily necessity. In the same way we reach absent-mindedly for deodorant or body lotion, you reach for a small alabaster jar. It's smooth. Cool surface, carefully carved and polished. Inside is a thick oil infused with something sweet and earthimer, perhaps, or lotus blossom. You dip your fingers into it, the texture rich and a little sticky, and smooth it across your skin. Instantly, the dryness of the desert softens. These oils serve two masters, scent and skin. The fragrance, of course, masks the sour temps of sweat. But just as important, the oil itself protects against the dryness that cracks skin and leaves it rough as pottery. The Egyptians knew this balanced, well-scented oil was comfort, health, and status, all at once. Even the simplest household might have a jar of unperfumed castor or moringa oil. While the wealthy boasted blends so complex, they read like recipes for desserts: cinnamon, frankincense, honey, cedarwood. If you close your eyes, you can imagine it a room filled not with harsh soap or disinfectant smells, but with layers of warm spice and floral sweetness drifting together like music. And it wasn't just about staying pleasant to yourself. These oils define social life. Imagine entering a crowded market. The air is already thick with the smells of roasting fish, drying reeds, and donkeys pressed too close together. But what you actually notice are the people, each carrying a small aura of perfume. One passerby leaves a trail of lotus, another smells faintly of resin, another of something musky and warm. You don't even need to look at their clothing to guess their wealth or rank. Your nose does the work. There's something almost ceremonial in the way you rub oil into your skin. A dab at the neck, a sweep down the arms, a touch across the chest. If you're preparing for a festival or feast, you might even balance a small wax cone of perfume on your wig. As the evening wears on, the cone melts, dripping into your hairpiece, releasing fragrance steadily like a slow-burning candle. To us, it sounds messy. To them, It was ingenious and automatic perfume dispenser that lasted all night. By the time you returned home, you would still be scented, even if the feast had gone late and the dancing had been enthusiastic. Even children wore perfumed amulets, small protective bundles of wax and resin hung from cords, thought to keep them safe as well as sweet-smelling. Priests used oils in temple rituals, rubbing down statues of the gods, as though the divine itself needed a morning moisturize. Everywhere you turned, oil was part of life, cosmetic, medicinal, spiritual. To be fragrant was to be civilized, to be orderly, to be in a way Egyptian. You smoothed the last of the oil into your hands, flexing your fingers. They glistened faintly in the light, the faint aroma of myrrh clinging there. But your gaze lingers on your nails, clean, yes, but uneven, a little ragged at the edges. And in a world where hands are both tools and calling cards, it won't do to leave them untended. Egyptians may not have invented nail polish, but they certainly understood grooming. And so, from the slippery richness of oils, your attention shifts down to those small but telling details. The simple copper tools used to trim and tidy fingernails, making even hard-working hands feel presentable again. Your skin is still slick with perfumed oil, fragrant with a sweetness that clings even as the desert air does its best to dry you out. But then you notice something small, almost invisible until it catches the light, sure nails. They're not terrible, but they're not neat either. The edges are uneven, tiny crescents of dust caught beneath them from grinding grain or hauling jars. In a place where so much of life is lived with bare hands, nails matter. They're not just decoration, they're proof that you care enough to present yourself cleanly, even when life is busy and the sand is relentless. So you reach for a tool. Not a modern clipper with its satisfying little snip sound. No, but something far simpler and older. A sliver of copper, maybe bronze if you're fortunate. Flat, narrow, sharpened along one edge. This is your nail cleaner, your trimmer, your multi-purpose grooming aid. It feels cool in your fingers, smooth from years of use and heavier than it looks. Copper was expensive enough that even these small instruments carried value. You'd never just leave one lying around. You press the edge gently against your fingernail. There's no quick, clean cut here. Instead, you scrape. Bit by bit, shaving away rough edges, smoothing down ridges, scooping out the fine line of dust gathered beneath. It takes patience. Your hands are your livelihood, whether weaving, grinding grain, or writing with a reed pen end. A snagged nail can mean discomfort, infection, or just a day of frustration. You keep at it until the crescent of each nail shines pale and even. The Egyptians thought about nails more than you might expect. Manicured hands were linked with beauty, elegance, and even spiritual cleanliness. Archaeologists have found copper and bronze manicure kits in tombs, sometimes alongside tweezers and little razors, as though the journey into the afterlife required the same tidy nails as life itself. After all, what use is eternity if you arrive with dirt under your nails? Of course, wealthier Egyptians went further. Henna, that reddish dye, could be used not only on hair, but also on nails, giving them a glossy, warm glow. Imagine lifting your hand and seeing each fingertip capped in a subtle orange red. A detail small enough to be overlooked in the market, but impossible to ignore up close. Clean nails showed order, and dyed nails whispered luxury. You take a step back and admire your own hands. They look cared for, lighter somehow without the rough edges. There's satisfaction in this rituals, precise, but undeniably human. The same instinct that drives us today to file and polish nails drove someone here, thousands of years ago, to fashion a copper scraper and make the effort. And yet, grooming doesn't stop with nails. You flex your fingers, and the faint glimmer of oil still clings there, catching the light. But then you notice the jewelry nearby, a simple ring, maybe a broad cuff bracelet waiting to be slipped on. Because here in Egypt, clean skin and neat nails weren't the end of the story. They were just the base layer, the canvas. The true finishing touch was adornment. Gold, beads, carnelian, and faience, worn not only to decorate the body but to protect it. Your nails are tidy, your hands soft with oil. Now, it's time to dress them up with jewelry that glitters in the sun and charms that claim to guard your soul. The oils on your skin still linger, faintly perfumed, and your nails gleam with a just-tended neatness. But all of that refinement ends the moment your gaze drops to your feet. The desert is unforgiving, and you know exactly what waits for them: dust, grit, and sand that finds its way into every crease, no matter how carefully you try to keep it out. Walking here is like agreeing to carry the desert with you, one grain at a time. Bare feet were common enough, but sandals were the practical compromise. You glance at yours. Thin soles fashioned from plaited papyrus fibers, or maybe strips of leather if you're fortunate. They're light, flexible, and frankly, not much protection at all. They keep your soles from burning on sun-baked stone, but they dainty stop the sand from pouring over the edges and sticking stubbornly between your toes. Every few steps, you feel the grit grinding softly, like a miniature mortar and pestle in your shoe. Still, there's a kind of rhythm to it. Step, crunch. Step, crunch. Sandal thongs rub against your instep, sometimes leaving small calluses, sometimes even blisters. You might envy the wealthy Egyptians, whose sandals were lined with softer leather or decorated with beads, sometimes even gilded. But even the most ornate pair would still fill with sand after a walk along the Nile's edge. Luxury, it turns out, can only go so far in a desert. Cleaning your feet becomes a daily ritual. You sit with a jar of water, pouring it slowly over your toes, watching the muddy rivulets swirl away. You rub at your soles, scraping gently with a stone, or rubbing with sand itself, yes, sand to clean away sand. Oddly enough, it works, smoothing out rough patches and removing what clings. Feet were often anointed with oil afterward, not just for comfort, but for health. Cracked heels and sores weren't trivial. They could make work unbearable. And when your world is built on walking tross fields through markets, to the river, healthy feet matter as much as clean hands. The Egyptians even gave feet symbolic weight. In tomb paintings, servants bend low to wash their master's feet, a gesture of humility and service. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was intimate, removing the dust of the day so the honored could feel fresh again. To wash another's feet was to acknowledge both the burden of the desert and the relief of being cared for. You stretch your toes, freshly rinsed and gleaming faintly with oil, and slip your sandals back on. They'll be dusty again within minutes, of course. But that's the rhythm of life here. Clean, dusty, over and over again. There's something oddly soothing about accepting it. The desert is always bigger than you, and as your feet carry you onward, you catch a hint of something sharper in the air, attempts of incense, the trace of a ritual. Because beyond daily scrubbing and sandal dust, hygiene here isn't only about comfort or appearances. It's woven tightly with ceremony, with purity, with offerings made not just to yourself but to the gods. Which brings you to the next layer of cleanliness, the sacred washings of ritual baths. Your feet are clean for the moment, at least, and your sandals are strapped back on. It's ready to meet the desert's endless grit. But what about the rest of you? Oil may smooth your skin, perfume may mask the day's sweat, yet there is still the question of what actually touches your body, hour by hour. In ancient Egypt, the answer is almost always the same: linen. You slip a tunic of woven flax over your shoulders, and the first sensation is coolness. Linen breathes. Even in the heat, even under the merciless Egyptian sun, it draws the sweat away and lets air slip across your skin. Cotton won't appear here for centuries, and wool is far too stifling in this climate. Linen is the fabric of life, the closest thing to comfort technology the ancient world can offer. The weave can tell a story of status. If you're a laborer, your linen is coarse, thick, and just a little scratchy. It's sturdy, practical, meant to survive days of hauling stones or tending fields. If you are wealthy, your linen is so fine, it borders on translucent. Priests and nobility sometimes wear garments that shimmer pale in the sun, so delicate that light pours through them like water through a sieve. The finer the weave, the higher the prestige. Clean, pale fabric became a kind of visual shorthand for purity, wealth, and elegance.
Wow.
Fresh linen also meant cleanliness. In a land where soap was gritty natron and daily scrubbing could leave the skin dry, a fresh tunic felt like a reset button. Priests in particular changed linen multiple times a day as part of ritual purification. Imagine pulling on a garment still warm from the sun, its fibers crisp and faintly scented from washing with natron or lye. It doesn't just cover you, it declares to the world that you've stepped out of dust and sweat into something more orderly. Linen had spiritual weight too. In life, it signaled cleanliness and refinement. In death, It wrapped the body for eternity. Mummies were swaddled in linen strips, layer upon layer, sometimes soaked in resin or oils. The very same fiber that cooled you in the heat of day was expected to guard you in the afterlife. It is as if linen, humble flax woven by careful hands, became a thread stitching together the mortal and the eternal. You smooth your tunic against your body, it rustles faintly, a sound dry and papery, not soft like modern cotton. The fabric feels almost alive, stiff at first but softening as you wear it, creasing and folding with the rhythm of your movements. Its pale color reflects the sun, helping you endure the heat, though by midday it will already bear traces of dust and sweat. Linen demands frequent washing, and in this land that work is constant. So, linen is more than clothing. It's a tool, a purifier, a symbol. It shields you from the sun, signals your place in society, and whispers promises of eternity. But as practical and elegant as it is, linen isn't enough to battle the realities of the Egyptian climate. Sweat, dust, and heat require constant care, and no matter how clean you feel now, the desert will remind you of its power. And that reminder leads naturally to the next matter of hygiene. Water not just for drinking, but for washing, bathing, and cleansing both body and spirit. For in Egypt, water was never just water. It was the Nile itself, and to step into it was to step into life renewed. The linen tunic against your skin feels crisp and clean, at least for a little while. But the desert is persistent, and it has a habit of inviting itself indoors. The dust doesn't politely wait at the threshold. It drifts in on sandals, slips through gaps in mud brick walls, rides every gust of wind, and settles into corners like a guest who refuses to leave. You could clean in the morning, and by midday, a new layer would already be waiting. Living in Egypt means living with sand always. Inside your home, you keep a broom. Not the bristled kind you might imagine, but a bundle of reeds tied tightly together, stiff enough to push grit along a clay floor. You grip the handle and begin to sweep, listening to the dry rasp of stalks brushing against stone. The sound is steady, rhythmic, scratch, scrape, shuffle, a meditative counterpoint to the chirping of birds outside. Each stroke gathers little piles of dust, flakes of mud, the odd stray beetle husk. You scoop it up, carry it out, and sigh at the inevitability of doing it all again tomorrow. For the Egyptians, sweeping wasn't just about tidiness. Clean floors mattered because dirt carried more than just discomfort. Where there's food, dust turns quickly to grime. Grime attracts pests, and pests invite disease. To sweep was to protect the home as much as to beautify it. Even temples had attendants whose job it was to keep the sacred spaces swept clean. Imagine kneeling with a reed broom in a hall of towering columns, brushing away the sand as if you were brushing chaos itself back out into the desert. Of course, the fight was a losing one. Sand came in endlessly, as though the desert were reminding you that your walls were only temporary. But there's a kind of peace in the ritual. You sweep not because you expect permanence, but because the act itself gives a momentary order. It is the same logic behind washing your body each morning, or changing into fresh linen. You create a small island of cleanliness, knowing full well it will be swallowed again soon. Children would sometimes help, their smaller hands gripping little bundles of reeds, imitating the adults. The floor was never spotless. It wasn't meant to be, but there was a satisfaction in pressing down the grit, smoothing the space where you sat, making the air feel lighter for a time. The Egyptians, who so valued order over chaos, treated sweeping as more than housekeeping. It was a small defense against the desert itself. You set your broom aside, lean it against the wall, and stretch your back. The floor looks brighter, smoother, even if you know the effect will last only a few hours. Your home feels a little fresher, your bare feet a little cleaner as they pad across the cool clay. And as you settle down, brushing a final trace of dust from your palm, you realize that the care given to floors was mirrored by the care given to another kind of surface, teeth. Because just as sand crept into every corner of the house, tiny grains of grit also found their way into bread and food, grinding down enamel with every bite. Which meant that daily sweeping wasn't limited to floors, it extended to your very own mouth. Your skin is rinsed, your nails trimmed, your feet freshly scrubbed, and your linen tunic rustles lightly as you move. But even with all this attention to cleanliness, you can't help noticing the faces around you. Smooth cheeks, shaven scalps, and always the eyes. They draw you in, framed with bold black lines of kohl that make every glance seem more deliberate, more commanding, as though everyone here knows the power of their own gaze. You pick up a small container, a tiny pot carved from alabaster, or perhaps shaped from clay. Inside, a fine, dark powder waits. Kohl, ground from galena, a type of lead or sometimes from soot. With a slender stick of wood or bone, you dip delicately into the mixture, then drag it carefully along the edge of your eyelid. The sensation is cool, a little scratchy, and slightly heavy, like a soft weight tugging gently on your lashes. In the polished surface of a bronze mirror, your eyes suddenly look larger, sharper, framed in shadow that softens the harsh glare of the sun. This isn't just fashion. Egyptians wore kohl for practical reasons. The desert light is brutal, bouncing off pale stone and bright water. The dark outline cuts the glare, much like athletes today smudging dark grease beneath their eyes. It keeps you from squinting constantly, from straining against the relentless brightness. And kohl had another advantage: it was believed to ward off eye infections thanks to its antibacterial properties. Imagine your eyeliner doubling as both sunscreen and hand sanitizer. It's quite a multitasker. But black wasn't the only choice. You reach for another palette, this one filled with a soft green powder made from malachite. Applied to the lids, it leaves a subtle shimmer, like a whisper of color against the bronze of your skin. Green was more than decorative, carried associations with rebirth, growth, and the protective eye of Horus, to where green shadow was to carry a blessing. A shield as much as it was to make your eyes shine in the sunlight. Children wore kohl too, not for beauty, but for protection. Parents painted heavy lines around young eyes to guard them from both illness and malevolent spirits. Imagine toddlers running through the dust with wide, darkly rimmed eyes, looking half like little fashion icons, half like pint-sized warriors. It was a cultural instinct, as practical as it was spiritual. Shield the most vulnerable with pigment and prayer. And of course, the wealthier you were, the more ornate your cosmetic kit became. Tiny spoons, carved palettes, elegant jars with stoppers shaped like lotus buds all were crafted not just to hold pigment, but to display status. Kohl became part of identity, part of self-presentation. To meet someone, gaze across the market and see the bold black outline of their eyes, was to see more than a person. You saw their care, their discipline, their place in the hierarchy of order over chaos. You finish lining your eyes and set the applicator down. The effect is striking, less a decoration, more a frame, as though your very face has been clarified, sharpened by contrast. You feel both practical, ready for the sun, and somehow elevated, as though you've joined a lineage stretching back through centuries of lined eyes and green-tinted lids. And yet, cosmetics don't stop with the eyes. You can't help but glance at your lips, your cheeks, even your skin. For while kohl and malachite framed the gaze, the rest of the face deserved its own attention: to rouge powders, scented balms, and creamy concoctions that softened as much as they adorned. Next comes the question of color and scent beyond the eyes. The cosmetics that gave warmth to cheeks, shine to lips, and fragrance to the very breath. Your skin is rinsed, your nails trimmed, your feet freshly scrubbed, and your linen tunic rustles lightly as you move. But even with all this attention to cleanliness, you can't help noticing the faces around you. Smooth cheeks, shaven scalps, and always the eyes. They draw you in, framed with bold black lines of kohl that make every glance seem more deliberate, more commanding, as though everyone here knows the power of their own gaze. You pick up a small container, a tiny pot carved from alabaster, or perhaps shaped from clay. Inside, a fine, dark powder waits. Kohl, ground from galena, a type of lead or sometimes from soot. With a slender stick of wood or bone, you dip delicately into the mixture, then drag it carefully along the edge of your eyelid. The sensation is cool, a little scratchy, and slightly heavy, like a soft weight tugging gently on your lashes. In the polished surface of a bronze mirror, your eyes suddenly look larger, sharper, framed in shadow that softens the harsh glare of the sun. This isn't just fashion. Egyptians wore kohl for practical reasons. The desert light is brutal, bouncing off pale stone and bright water. The dark outline cuts the glare, much like athletes today smudging dark grease beneath their eyes. It keeps you from squinting constantly, from straining against the relentless brightness. And kohl had another advantage: it was believed to ward off eye infections thanks to its antibacterial properties. Imagine your eyeliner doubling as both sunscreen and hand sanitizer. It's quite a multitasker. But black wasn't the only choice. You reached for another palette, this one filled with a soft green powder made from malachite. Applied to the lids, it leaves a subtle shimmer, like a whisper of color against the bronze of your skin. Green was more than decorative, carried associations with rebirth, growth, and the protective eye of Horus, to where green shadow was to carry a blessing. A shield as much as it was to make your eyes shine in the sunlight. Children wore kohl too, not for beauty, but for protection. Parents painted heavy lines around young eyes to guard them from both illness and malevolent spirits. Imagine toddlers running through the dust with wide, darkly rimmed eyes, looking half like little fashion icons, half like pint-sized warriors. It was a cultural instinct, as practical as it was spiritual. Shield the most vulnerable with pigment and prayer. And of course, the wealthier you were, the more ornate your cosmetic kit became. Tiny spoons, carved palettes, elegant jars with stoppers shaped like lotus buds all were crafted not just to hold pigment, but to display status. Kohl became part of identity, part of self-presentation. To meet someone, gaze across the market and see the bold black outline of their eyes, was to see more than a person. You saw their care, their discipline, their place in the hierarchy of order over chaos. You finish lining your eyes and set the applicator down. The effect is striking, less a decoration, more a frame, as though your very face has been clarified, sharpened by contrast. You feel both practical, ready for the sun, and somehow elevated, as though you've joined a lineage stretching back through centuries of lined eyes and green-tinted lids. And yet, cosmetics don't stop with the eyes. You can't help but glance at your lips, your cheeks, even your skin. For while kohl and malachite framed the gaze, the rest of the face deserved its own attention. Rouge powders, scented balms, and creamy concoctions that softened as much as they adorned. Next comes the question of color and scent beyond the eyes. The cosmetics that gave warmth to cheeks, shine to lips, and fragrance to the very breath. Your eyes are now framed with deep black kohl, softened with green shadow. The desert glare dulled, and your gaze sharpened. But as you study your reflection in a polished bronze mirror, your attention drifts from your eyes to the rest of your face, and then further to the skin of your scalp and body. Here in Egypt, smoothness is more than fashion, is comfort, practicality, and perhaps most importantly, purity. Hair attracts heat, it also attracts dust, sweat, and most unwelcome of all, lice. In a land where the sun beats down daily, and where daily life already leaves you coated in sand, removing hair is less an aesthetic whim and more a sensible solution. So, you reach for a tool, a razor. Not the sleek steel contraption of a modern bathroom, but a simple crescent-shaped blade of copper or bronze. It glints faintly in the sunlight, worn by youths sharpened carefully on stone. Running it across your scalp is not as effortless as you might like. There is no lubricating cream, no clever pivoting head. Instead, you steady your hand, pull the skin taut, and drag the blade carefully, slowly. Each stroke scrapes with a sound not unlike leather being pared, leaving behind the prickly smoothness of freshly shaved skin. There's always the risk of a nick or cut, but you weigh it against the thought of scratching constantly at lice. Smoothness usually wins. For the wealthy, the ritual of shaving might be entrusted to a servant. A trained barber who could trim beards, scrape scalps, and shape eyebrows with a practiced hand. In fact, barbers could be found even in marketplaces, their work performed in public, the steady scrape of bronze against skin mingling with the chatter of merchants. It was not a private indulgence, but a communal necessity. And it wasn't just the head. Arms, legs, even torsos could be shaved, especially for priests. Religious duties required purity, and smoothness was part of that. A priest might be shaved head to toe every few days, stripped bare of any distraction. Entering temple service as a vessel as clean as the polished floors of the sanctuary, imagine that feeling: no hair, no shadow of stubble, your skin oiled and glistening under linen, every inch declaring your readiness for ritual. The sensation afterward is strangely refreshing. Without the itch of sweat-matted hair, you feel lighter, cooler, almost aerodynamic against the desert breeze. To cover your scalp, you might wear a wig-thick, styled, perfumed, a removable crown of hair that can be cleaned or replaced at will. Or you might leave it bare, gleaming under the sun, an open declaration of hygiene and devotion. Both choices carry their own dignity. Razors themselves were small marvels. Even humble households might keep a simple copper blade tucked away with other grooming tools. While wealthier tombs have yielded razors crafted with care, their handles decorated, their edges sharpened to a fine curve. To be buried with a razor was to assume you'd need smooth skin in the afterlife too. After all, eternity is a long time to put up with lice. You set the blade aside and rub a little oil into your scalp, the sting of the razor's edge soothed by fragrance and moisture. The skin glistens, smooth and fresh, free of hair and its problems. You run your hand across it and feel a sense of accomplishment. Simple, practical, but also deeply tied to the rhythms of your world. And as you step out into the light, scalp smooth and eyes framed with kohl, you realize grooming isn't just about the body, it extends into the air around you. The Egyptians didn't only shape their appearance, they shaped the atmosphere itself, filling spaces with smoke and scent, which leads naturally to the next ritual of daily hygiene. The curling tendrils of incense. Your scalp is smooth, your skin oiled, your eyes darken with kohl. You look, at least for now, like someone who has mastered the dust and heat of Egypt. But hygiene is never perfect. Not here, not anywhere. A scratch on your arm from carrying a basket, a blister rubbed raw by your sandals, or a cut nicked by that bronze, razor-small injuries are inevitable. And in a world without antibiotics, even a simple scrape could become a serious problem. Yet the Egyptians had their own answer, and it came from something sweet: honey. You picture a clay jar sealed with wax, the lid carefully pried open. Inside glows thick golden honey, glistening under the light. The scent is warm, floral, almost intoxicating in aroma that promises not only sweetness for the tongue, but healing for the skin. To you it might look like food, but to an Egyptian healer, this was medicine. A natural disinfectant long before the word existed. When you smear honey onto a wound, it clings thickly, sealing the cut against dust and flies. There is a faint sting, then a soothing warmth, as though the injury itself breathes easier under its golden covering. Honey's antibacterial properties, unknown in theory, but well known in practice, help to keep infections at bay. The Egyptians wrote prescriptions on papyrus that included honey in more than half their remedies. For burns, sores, and gashes, honey was as trusted as any physician. But honey was more than a practical cure. To the Egyptians, it carried symbolic weight. Bees themselves were thought to have sprung from the tears of the sun god Ra. Their honey was both earthly and divine, sweet enough to be offered in temples, valuable enough to be sealed in tombs. To spread honey over a wound was to borrow a little light from the gods, to let sweetness itself become a shield against decay. Imagine your antiseptic ointment today coming with a built-in prayer. It wasn't used alone either. Honey was mixed with grease and lint to create poultices, or blended with herbs for pastes. Sometimes natron was added, sometimes frankincense. A small jar of medical honey might smell less like a kitchen and more like a spice shop. And though the exact recipes varied, the principle was the same. Sweetness could heal. Of course, this came with a hint of irony. You might anoint your wounds with honey in the morning, only to eat honey with bread that evening. Medicine and food blurred into one another, a reminder that nourishment itself was part of healing. Honey was both luxury and necessity, indulgence and salvation. You flex your hand, remembering the cut that you once let a healer smear with golden balm. The wound closed neatly, leaving behind only the faintest scar. In this desert world, survival often hinged on the smallest of details. And honey, humble, sticky, miraculous was one of them. And as sweet as it was, honey wasn't the only thing pressed into service. Other substances, equally humble, equally ingenious, were brought out of jars to soothe pain, reduce swelling, or mend skin. From resins to garlic, the Egyptian household doubled as a pharmacy. But of all these remedies, honey held a special place. Not just food, not just medicine, but something in between. A reminder that health and sweetness could come from the same golden jar. And so, the care of the body was never only about cleaning it, was about healing too. Which leads naturally to the question of what happened when simple remedies were in. teeing off when illness spread not just to a wound, but through the whole body. You can wash your skin with oils, shave with bronze razors, even seal wounds with honey butt. Eventually, your body demands a different kind of attention. Quieter, less glamorous, but entirely unavoidable ritual. Yes, we've arrived at the humble subject of toilets. Not the marble thrones of Rome, not the flush-and-forget modern wonders, but the surprisingly practical arrangements of ancient Egypt. Picture yourself in a modest mud brick home, the midday sun pressing hard against the walls. Inside, there's a corner set aside for this most basic task. No wooden doors or porcelain fixtures, here just a limestone or ceramic seat, shaped with a hollow. Beneath it sits a jar or a pit lined with sand, ready to catch what you contribute. Your visit isn't accompanied by the whoosh of water, but by silence, save for the faint scrape of sand shifting below. When finished, you might cover things with fresh sand, cat litter style. Congratulations, you and your pet share a similar bathroom technology. Wealthier households had more durable versions, stone slabs with holes cut neatly, some even placed above drains or sand-filled containers for easier cleaning. Temples and larger estates sometimes included rows of communal seats, reminding you that privacy wasn't always the top priority. Imagine sitting side by side with your neighbors, discussing the weather or the price of grain, all while taking care of business. Awkward, perhaps? Normal? Absolutely. Now, hygiene was still a concern. Sand helped absorb moisture and odors, but the air inside a small room could grow heavy quickly. Ashes or natron might be scattered in pits to neutralize smells. Waste was sometimes hauled away, dumped outside the city, or spread onto fields as fertilizer, recycling ancient style. The Nile and the fertile soil it blessed were everything, and nothing was wasted if it could nourish crops. You crouch, you finish, you rise. Simple, direct, functional. No scrolls of soft paper at hand, of course. Instead, you might reach for a piece of broken pottery, a shard smoothed just enough to scrape, or a bundle of straw. Or simply rinse with water poured from a jar if you're fortunate. Toilet paper, centuries away, would probably have felt like a god's gift compared to these options. Still, it wasn't all grim. There is something almost grounding about it, the body-esque reminder that no matter how many wigs you wear, how much perfumed oil you pour over yourself, or how smoothly your scalp gleams, you are still a creature of very ordinary needs. Kings and farmers alike had to squat, sigh, and scoop sand afterward. The toilet, in that sense, was the great equalizer. And though these rituals might not strike you as glamorous, they were part of maintaining health. Neglecting sanitation meant sickness. Villages relied on the quiet removal of waste as much as they relied on honey for wounds or oils for the skin. Hygiene wasn't just about the glamorous rituals of kohl-lined eyes or linen tunics. It was also about making sure your living space didn't become unbearable. You'll leave the corner, wash your hands in a small basin of water, perhaps rubbing with natron to cleanse. The air outside feels fresher now, the sunlight almost celebratory after the stillness of that small room. And though it might not be spoken of often, this quiet business is as vital to daily life as the most perfumed oils. From here you're reminded that what goes into the body is just as important as what comes out. And in Egypt, with its fertile fields and generous river, diet and digestion were an entire world of their own. Which takes us, fittingly, from toilets to tables where bread, beer, and onions ruled supreme. The day has been long. The sun has dragged itself across the sky, and now it sinks, softening the edges of the world in a glow of copper and rose. The air cools at last, though the stones still radiate a little heat beneath your bare feet. This is the time when you pause, set aside the tools of the day, and turn toward a ritual that is as much about comfort as it is about cleanliness. The evening wash before rest. Water is not infinite, yet the Nile gives generously, and so you pour from a clay jug into a simple basin. Surface trembles, catching the fading light like liquid gold. You dip your hands, cupping the coolness, and splash your face. The grit of the day dust. Sweat. The faint stickiness of oils loosens and slides away. It is not a full immersion, not the luxury of a plunge into the river, but a quiet moment of renewal. Think of it like brushing your teeth before bed, minus the peppermint foam and electric buzzing. There's no soap in the modern sense, But natron comes to the rescue once again. The powdery mix of salts softens when wet, scrubbing gently at your skin. You rub your arms, your legs, feeling the residue of the day lift off. There is a slight sting, the reminder that the substance is alkaline. The reward is a skin that feels lighter, less burdened. Perhaps you follow it with a thin layer of oil frankincense if you are wealthy, plain castor, or linseed if not so. Your skin does not dry into cracks. You smell faintly herbal, faintly smoky, a natural lullaby drifting from your pores. Hair, whether shaved close or covered with a wig during the day, is tended to as well. If you keep your head smooth, you may polish it with a little oil so it gleams even in the dim torchlight. If you wear a wig, you remove it carefully, dusting it of sand and perhaps placing it on a wooden stand to keep its shape. No one wants to dream while tangling with an itchy mass of reeds and human hair. Scalp beneath, freed at last, can breathe. The evening breeze brushes it cool. Feet, of course, deserve special attention. They've carried you across hot sand, rough thresholds, and fields of silt. You sit, perhaps on a low stool, and wash them last, letting the water grow murky with the Nile's endless dust. Sandals are set aside. The soles of your feet are rubbed with care, for tomorrow they must start all over again. A dry foot means a restful night. The act is quiet, unhurried. It is not just about removing dirt, but signaling to your body that the day is done. The basin is emptied outside, the last trickle darkening the dust. The smell of oil mingles with the evening air, a gentle blend of earth and resin. Somewhere in the distance, frogs sing along the riverbank, and the occasional donkey calls out as though bidding good night. You settle on your bedding, linen sheets stretched over woven mats. Your skin feels clean, your scalp cool, your muscles soothed by the small ritual of washing. It is a moment of peace, as essential as eating, as quiet as prayer. Without it, you would carry the dust of the day into your dreams. With it, you drift into sleep a little lighter. And as your eyes close, you realize hygiene is not only about tending to the body, but about preparing the spirit for rest, which leads naturally to the next question. How exactly do you sleep, and on what kind of bed does an Egyptian night truly unfold? You've rinsed, oiled, shaved, polished, and prayed. You've walked barefoot across sand that clings no matter how often you sweep it out. You've crouched in quiet corners and sat in temple shadows. Yet when you step back and look at it all, you realize something remarkable. This devotion to cleanliness, to ritual, to the care of body and spirit has outlived the people who practiced it. Their homes have crumbled. Their linen has long since turned to dust. But their habits, echoes of their routines linger, etched into stone and written into the sand. Carved on temple walls are scenes of priests pouring water over statues of gods, of servants fanning nobles after baths, of jars of oils stacked neatly like offerings. These are not minor decorations. They tell you what mattered. They're reminders that to wash and to anoint was not trivial. It was civilization itself. Hygiene, woven into daily life, was recorded with the same seriousness as battles or harvests. The gods might demand monuments, but they also demanded clean skin and fresh linen. And when archaeologists brush away the sand, they find the tools of this legacy. Razors of bronze, their edges dulled but still gleaming faintly. Shards of pottery that once scraped away dirt, as humble as they are revealing. Deep traces of natron, the ancient cleanser, in the embalming workshops. Perfume jars, still carrying the faintest whiff of resin after millennia in the desert. These small artifacts whisper of mornings and evenings long gone, of people who stood by the Nile and rinsed the dust from their faces, just as you once did in your basin before bed. There's a curious comfort in this. Your toothbrush, your soap, your evening shower, they are not so different from the pebble scrub, the natron rub, the oil massage. Modernity likes to imagine itself unique, but in truth, the desire to be clean, to smell pleasant, to prepare the body for rest or ritual is one of the most ancient of human instincts. When you lean over a sink and splash water on your face at night, you are carrying forward a habit older than most kingdoms, older than the very languages we speak. The sand, of course, has swallowed so much. Palaces have collapsed, towns have vanished, and the river itself has shifted its path. But the idea of hygiene, of a life that is dignified, ordered, and fragrant remains. Egypt's devotion to purity is not just a relic. It is a foundation stone of something that still guides us. You live in its legacy every day, whether you know it or not. And so, as you close your eyes and breathe in the quiet, you can imagine the soft hiss of sand against stone, the eternal river flowing just beyond the horizon, and the faint scent of incense rising in the temple air. The people are gone, the gods have shifted names, but the legacy remains in stone, in sand. And in the rituals of care that still shape how you prepare for sleep tonight. From this enduring legacy, it is only natural to drift into a final reflection with these habits, etched across time, remind us about the fragile but resilient dignity of being human. And so, we come to the end of our walk along the Nile, through oil-slicked palms and sand-swept courtyards, through quiet temple basins and humble household corners. You have seen how Egyptians washed, shaved, polished, anointed, and even scrubbed with pebbles. You have squatted over stone seats, dusted your wig, and rubbed your feet raw with natron. None of it was glamorous in the modern sense, yet all of it was profoundly human. Hygiene in ancient Egypt wasn't just about appearances. It was about comfort, about dignity, about standing before neighbors or gods with a body that was cared for rather than neglected. It was survival in a hot, dusty land, but also ritual, devotion, even beauty. To live clean was to live in harmony with order, to hold chaos at bay with soap made of sand and oils pressed from seeds. As you listen now, resting perhaps in your own clean sheets, you can smile at the thought that, while your shower has running water and your toothpaste dosen tea contain crushed shells, the impulse is the same. Thousands of years vanish, and what remains is this simple desire to end the day feeling washed, fresh, and ready for rest. Stone crumbles, linen disintegrates, and sand buries all but the habits endure. Every evening wash, every polished scalp, every rubbed foot was part of a chain that still links to you here now. It is a legacy not of grandeur, but of intimacy, of the small choices that make life livable. So as you close your eyes, imagine the hush of the desert at night, the faint trickle of water poured from a jug, the whisper of linen against skin. Let it lull you, the shared hum of humanity stretching across millennia. You are clean, you are at rest, and tomorrow the sun will rise again, as it always has. Over a people who understood that caring for the body is one way of caring for the soul. Good night. May your dreams be as smooth as polished stone and as calm as the Nile under moonlight.